Hello, everybody. I have to warn you, this stream may crap out. We've had bad weather, and my internet is currently acting up. I think because of that, I wasn't able to. I was just trying to send some emails, and I was unable to. Give me a warning in the chat if you see, if I freeze or if something goes weird. Otherwise, we'll just assume that things are working, and I'll go ahead. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, so this time I'm going to talk about the characteristic of anicca, impermanence. The Pali word is very literal translation, or impermanence is a very literal translation of anicca, not lasting, not permanent. And this is the idea that nothing conditioned which exists in samsara persists or is lasting. There is nothing you can find that will persist. This ties in to the other characteristics, and this is a kind of a point I'd like to make with this series of talks, is that all the three characteristics kind of reflect each other. Because of impermanence, we suffer when things fall away. So that, there's that subjective aspect of dukkha, but it's also the objective aspect of dukkha is reflected in impermanence, because things come and go out of existence. So they're not. This is in itself is a sign that they're not perfect, that they're not stable, and it's also a reflection of emptiness, because they persistence of things only for a moment means that substantiality cannot be real. So there are different levels or time scales on which to contemplate impermanence, and the Buddha talked about all of them. First of all, we could start at the human level. The impermanence of a human life, a human existence, of a human life, a human existence. This is the awareness or contemplation of death, to remind ourselves again and again that we are not here forever, that this body, as soon as it's born, it begins changing. It grows for a while, then it starts to decay and age, and then it falls away and dies. There is no stability for a human lifespan. And the only thing we can be sure of is that we will die. We can't know ahead of time the place, the time, or the means of death, but it's inevitable that death will occur. So that's one level. We could say the middle level contemplation of impermanence, the contemplation of impermanence at the scale of a human existence. Excuse me a moment. Okay. Okay, sorry about that interruption. Okay, so the scale of impermanence at a human lifespan. Uh, there's also longer time scales that the Buddha talked about that we might call geological or cosmological, and this is uh, most evident in the Sattasurya Sutta, where he talks about the impermanence of the sun, that the sun will eventually multiply into 7 suns and then burn up the whole earth, including Mount Seneru and the Great Ocean. And this is one of the primary sources. This sutta in the Anguttara is one of the primary sources for the Buddhist model of the Earth-Sun system and the geological or cosmological history. And the Buddha did not give these teachings just as a kind of lesson, using the understanding of his time. It's quite clear from that sutta that he's giving it for a pedagogical reason, to emphasize the factor of impermanence, because to the ancient Indian mind, Mount Seneru would be a symbol of stability and permanence. It's sort of roughly equivalent to the way we say in English. There's a saying, steady as the rock of Gibraltar. And this is, the Seneru is 10,000 times greater than that. It's this massive mountain that's existed since the beginning of time and will persist to the end of the earth. But it too comes to an end. This was the Buddhist point, that even the things we take as absolutely permanent, mountains and the sun and the ocean, they're changing, and they're falling away and eventually will be destroyed. So we can take the same teaching, looking at the world from the modern scientific model. The underlying teaching remains the same. We see on this earth, we see mountains, and we see oceans and continents, and they're all changing and shifting, but at a scale we're not aware of because of the briefness and quickness of our mind. Some mountains are rising up because of the crashing plates, that the Rocky Mountains, because of the Pacific and the North American plates crashing together slowly over time, driving up this massive earth. Other mountains are old mountains that are eroding away. We have near where I live, there's a series of hills they call the Nor'westers that are modest kind of mountains now, but 20 million years ago, they were huge volcanoes. So everything is changing on this, and the earth and the sea, and the continents are moving together, moving apart. I'm trying to remember how it goes. The middle of the Atlantic Ocean is the Mid-Atlantic ridge. Yeah, so the continents of the Americas and Europe are getting closer together a little bit every year. And the Pacific is widening by the same amount. So things are moving and shifting, and eventually the Earth ends. Eventually, the sun will turn into a red giant and boil up the solar system. So there's that level of impermanence that's beyond our ordinary human lifespan to really observe, but it's worth contemplating that even things we take as permanent and stable in the world are not. They actually are changing and falling away. So that's the sort of macrocosmic scale. But what is the real essence of the teaching of impermanence is on the very small time scale. The time scale of the arising and falling away of dhammas, the momentary nature of things, the momentary nature of things. This is one of the core concepts of Abhidhamma. A dhamma is sort of the atomic principle in the Buddha's conception of the world. It's been compared by one, or called by one modern Buddhist writer, Sherbatsky, came upon what I think is a very good phrase to describe a dhamma in English, is a point instant. And this is the ultimate building block of reality, is this point instant of reality. And it's an excellent choice of words because of the mathematical meaning of point and instant. A point is a unit in space that has location, but it has no length or breadth. And a instant is the equivalent in time. It's a particular point in time, but it has no duration. So this again points to the emptiness. The dhammas flash in and out of existence. For example, one of the statements made in an Abhidhamma text is that motion is impossible. Dhammas just cease where they arise. So what we perceive as motion is merely subsequent arising in adjacent locations. So this is a very deep, radical view of impermanence, that things don't persist even for us, for the briefest of moments. They're point instants. They have no duration. They have no extension. But somehow the macrocosmic world that we live in and perceive is built up of these myriad dhammas flashing in and out of existence. But they don't do so randomly, they do so according to causes and conditions. So that's why there's a perception of orderliness in the universe. So this kind of perception of impermanence, to directly perceive that is really, at the deepest level, it's really beyond the capacity of the ordinary human mind. This is something that the mind of a Buddha can perceive, but we can get closer and closer to that. And this is the kind of objective in Vipassana meditation, is to speed up the noticing so that briefer and briefer intervals of occurrence are noted by consciousness, that we're perceiving closer and closer to this momentary reality, and we can really get a sense of that. There is a experience that many meditators have, and if they get very sharp and quick with their noticing, they begin to perceive reality in a very staccato kind of manner, like strobe light. So it's like momentary, discrete events rather than an analog sort of flow. An analogy would be like old style film, where you have not the modern digital films, but the old reel-to-reel films or movies. They were made up of a series of still pictures, and they would flash by 7 per second, and that was fast enough that the ordinary human perception didn't notice the discrete nature of the images, but blended them together and saw solid movement. or smooth movement. And this is actually at the deepest level of reality. This is what's happening. There's discrete moments that we perceive blended together into a smooth movement because of the slowness of our awareness. When you begin to understand impermanence on that level, you can really see that there's nothing uh, at all that you can depend on. There's nothing steady. There's nothing persisting. There's nothing that can be counted on. Everything is breaking up and falling away instant by instant. Uh, so a perception of that breaking up of impermanence, the breaking up of reality through impermanence, this is another route into realizing nibbida, the disenchantment, because you're no longer fooled or fascinated by the changing kaleidoscope of reality, because you see it's what it's made of, and it no longer grips the mind in the same way. And there's a falling apart, there's a breaking up of reality that liberates the mind. And if you go through in that way and emerge from conditioned reality in that manner by the contemplation of impermanence, it's called the signless liberation, animitta, because there's no sign, and there's no nimitta. And nimitta means a constructed object, or a created object is probably better. It's a mental construction or creation, and it's used in the text in a couple of ways. Sometimes we hear about the Buddha or other beings with psychic powers creating nimittas, meaning creating mind-made illusory objects. But a more common use is a nimitta, as used in meditation, is when you construct in your mind some visual image that you meditate on. This is, underlies the practice of kasina meditation. And so if you create, say, a red disc, you're working with the red kasina, you create a red disc in your mind and you meditate on it. That's a mind-created object, a nimitta. And while you're doing that practice and you have good samadhi, that seems like a stable, permanent, unchanging object. But with the eye of insight, you see that nothing is really permanent or stable, that breaking up and reforming constantly. So there's no possibility of a nimitta of any kind, even really a momentary one. So it's a animitta liberation, a signless liberation. So that's the way that an in-depth penetration of impermanence can lead to liberation. The one other thing I should cover is the way that impermanence is ordinarily disguised. All the three characteristics are not natively evident, meaning that if you don't have any mental development, you don't meditate, you just take things in a naive way, you don't see impermanence necessarily, and it's hidden by the illusion of continuity. And this relates to the reality of the universe being orderly, that things arise according to causes and conditions. So as we said, the dhammas are coming in and out of existence constantly at a very rapid pace, but they're not doing so in a random fashion, in which case there wouldn't be any kind of a universe really. There would just be, a chaos of occurrences. But instead, we see things unfold according to orderly laws. That the dhammas arise in sequence, um, conditioned by uh, previous dhammas and also by surrounding or environmental dhammas. That there's a relationship between the dhammas, it's the interdependency. So things arise in an orderly, conditioned manner, and we can actually work out, and this is the whole basis of science, we can work out laws of the universe by studying laws of nature, by studying the way things unfold. We can do experiments and tinker with things and then see how they react, how they change, and we can make very sound predictions about how they will change in the future based on what we've learned. And this illusion of continuity leads to a misperception of things as being permanent. We look at something like uh, any kind of discrete object, and we see it as persisting in time rather than as something momentarily arising and ceasing, and that has, even in its form, has a history, and was formed at some point, and at some point will be taken apart. Ajahn Chah was asked once, "What's the best way to contemplate impermanence?" And he raised his teacup like this, and he said, "You see this cup? It's broken. Of course, it's not broken at this moment, but we can be certain any existing cup will eventually be a bunch of busted bits of ceramic. There's no cup in the world will escape that fate. And every body, every human and animal body will eventually decay and be dissolved. And as we said before, even the sun and the moon and the sea and the mountains will eventually cease to be. So there are all these different ways of approaching the idea of impermanence. The final point I'd like to make before ending and going to questions is that the most important aspect, or the deepest and most liberating aspect to try and understand and penetrate, is the momentary nature of reality, and the impermanence of dhammas at a very quick time scale. Okay, so I'll stop there and take some questions. So far, the internet's held out, so maybe we're going to be in luck. Can we translate upadana as assumption versus clinging? Well, clinging is not really a good translation. It's sort of good, and it sort of works, but it's not a very literal translation. The more literal understanding of upadana is as fuel or as basis. Um, because this is the stage in which craving becomes the fuel of becoming. I hope all the devas of the storm clouds don't misbehave. Yes, so far they're being good. It's actually, the sun is out now, so we may be okay. There was a real heavy thunderstorm, just before I got on the line here. Today I put some food outside and wished metta for any being who eats it. After a while, ants all over it, and a cat comes and started eating while the ants are on it, killing them. What should I do? Should I let the cat eat, knowing the ants are dying, or do I save the ants, not letting the cat eat? Not knowing the cat, we have not eaten in days. Yeah, there's different different people have would have different answers to that. My inclination is always not to interfere in nature. But if one animal is uh, eating another, that's sort of their that's the animal realm. There's nothing. Uh, I mean, you can interfere. You can save the ants, but then you're as you say, you're possibly injuring the cat. So my approach is always not to interfere. Like I've seen both here and in Thailand, I've seen things like snakes eating frogs. And I just and some people say you only save the frog. Well, then you're starving the snake. I don't really see that you're doing something good there. Some monks say that it's pointless and foolish to explain sunyata because it's unexplainable because we will get stuck in relativity and perception rather than seeing the real thing, your thoughts. Yeah, I can see the point that um, particularly well with any of these characteristics, the real, but particularly with emptiness, with sunyata, the objective should be to know them directly, experientially. And there's a kind of a trap of that one can fall into of intellectualizing it too much, which we have to do to some degree to talk about it or explain it, or you read it in a book to learn about it. But you can't rely on the words, you know. Uh, and it is in the end, you know, uh, and it is in the end, and particularly with Sunya, it's impossible to completely capture it in words, but you can point to it, and kind of get an idea. Nimitta, mental constructs, our whole Western science exists within that. Yeah, well, that's not. That's I can see some truth to that, but I don't think that's entirely a bad thing. But if you remember that, I think people tend to forget it. Um, what science is providing us with are models of reality, uh, not reality itself. And over time, models get better; they get more refined, and we could say in an abstract way that they reflect reality better. But the real, more precise thing is you could say about any model to judge the quality of a model is how well it predicts future events, which is really the way if you look at the history of how our understanding of the solar system went from Ptolemy to Copernicus to Kepler, that it kept getting refined, and each successive model was better able to explain observed events, but it's still just a model. If dhammas are fundamental realities that can't be broken into parts, isn't their impermanence then being erased from existence and kind of annihilationism? Well, they don't really. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and there's some truth to that. But I think that they're not. It's not annihilationism really, because they don't exist as a substantial entity to begin with. So there's nothing that's really being annihilated. The dhammas are the synonyms for kalapas. Yeah, the word kalapa is late Abhidhamma, and it's kind of a refinement on the Dhamma theory. Um, in that the kalapas are sort of, I guess, an analogy, a rough analogy would be dhammas are like atoms and kalapas are like molecules. That they're very small, brief constellations of dhammas that uh, are slightly more closer to being perceivable. There are feelings of happiness, sadness, and neutral. What does an arahant feel? Do they excuse me? Do they just do they just feel contentment? Um, Arahant never feels sadness. They don't have the mental factor of the domanassa, but uh, they can feel joy. Um, I think mostly they would be in a state of equanimity. There was an early school called the Sutanika, end of the suttas. They rejected all Abhidhamma and only accepted suttas. How closely does this teaching actually match the suttas? Um, I haven't studied. I know of that school. I haven't studied their teachings in depth, so I can't say. I would guess that they probably follow the suttas pretty closely because if they were relying only on the suttas, not on Abhidhamma. If all is impermanent, why isn't karma? Why don't I just die and it's over? Well, karma is impermanent. Is impermanent too. It has its time. It We make a karma and it's done, but then it has a result in the future. And that's at another time. So there's a sequence of dhammas of comic effective and comic resultant that are constantly shifting. And once the result has occurred, then the karma doesn't exist anymore. It has no effective power. How can we know that consciousness arises moment to moment if the space between each mind has no consciousness? That there would be no awareness of the space between. Well, this is, uh, I think, one of the critiques of Nagarjuna in the Majjhimika school, who uh, developed critiques for all the various kind of theories of reality that were current in the Buddhist circles, and there was different ones. But the Abhidhamma view does depend on the sequence of dhammas, and Nagarjuna's point, which I think is parallel to yours, was that if Dhamma A only exists for a moment, and it's the cause of Dhamma B, how can it be a cause when it ceases to exist? And they can't both exist simultaneously. It's a pretty sound critique, actually. If objects are inherently dukkha, then isn't an arhat making contact with its suffering due to the object's inherent dukkha? Uh, well, as I've been trying to emphasize, there's a subjective and objective aspect to dukkha. The objective aspect is that which is inherent in all dhammas, but the suffering is subjective. So that's the half of the equation that would not affect the arahant. When witnessing one animal kill another, is it best to wish anything particular for both parties? Well, I guess the appropriate um, uh, emotive state would be compassion for the one who's being eaten, and karuna, sympathetic joy for the one who's enjoying his dinner. Is it bad karma to get cosmetic surgery if you were ugly? No, I don't think there's any. I don't think that's bad karma. It was probably a waste of money, but that's another question. On the ant versus cat question, I'm reminded of Blake. One law for the lion and ox's impression. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, I'll take a couple more, I think, and then I'll stop. I'm not feeling it all that well today. Kind of low energy. In Vipassana, they talk of Sankara Upeka. In Samatha, they talk of fourth jhana. What are the differences, similarities? Um, there's actually quite a parallel between Sankara Upeka, the equanimity of formations, which is a late stage, highly developed stage of Vipassana, and the fourth jhana. The In both cases, the mind is completely at peace and at ease. I think the difference is that in Sankara Upeka, the mind, although very contented and quiet, is not completely still. There's still an observation of objects. So the insight process continues. Okay, I think I'll have to stop here and take it on again next week. We'll do anatta or sunyata. Okay.